Metal Gear Solid 5, the most controversial game in a series rife with controversy, hailed by critics as one of the best Metal Gear games in the series, but disliked by fans for abandoning many of the things they had come to love. It's been 8 years since the game released way back in 2015. Was this game truly a masterpiece, as good as the critics say it was? Or did we all just get swept up in the hype that Kojima is well known for creating? To really understand the hype that surrounded the game back in 2015, we have to take a step back and look at the history of the Metal Gear Solid series and why it's such a big deal. In 1987, a little title called Metal Gear was released for the MSX2. Metal Gear, an action-adventure stealth game considered by many to be the first of its kind, and also the first game developed by Hideo Kojima. At the time of release, nobody, including Hideo Kojima, anticipated what kind of a phenomenon they had created here. The game released to modest acclaim from critics, but became a bestseller for Konami, remaining on the top 20 MSX games list for the next 5 months. Kojima would go on to direct most of the Metal Gear series for the next 25 years, until the massive falling out between Kojima and Konami, right before the Metal Gear Solid 5 release, but more on that later. In 1999, Kojima would again revolutionize the stealth genre with Metal Gear Solid for the PSX, blending together a complex narrative full of twists and turns with very tight 3D stealth gameplay, the likes of which hadn't been seen yet. Metal Gear Solid launched to critical acclaim, receiving awards from nearly every gaming magazine. Kojima continues to revolutionize the stealth genre. In 2001, Metal Gear Solid 2 released for the PlayStation 2. Again, critical acclaim follows, and Kojima seems unstoppable. The game features tighter gameplay, complicated level structures, and a more complex story. It also involved Kojima's first of many controversies surrounding Metal Gear. Protagonist Gate, as I like to call it. See, Kojima loves to switch things up. And boy, did he switch things up with Metal Gear Solid 2. Here's what he did. He swapped out the protagonist. Solid Snake, the longtime hero of the series, was replaced. But he didn't just replace him. All promotional materials, trailers, preview materials, and even the first level of the game had Solid Snake as the protagonist. So, players were completely blindsided as Solid Snake appears to die at the end of the first level. Only to leave us for the rest of the game in the not-so-capable hands of Raiden, leading to, as you can imagine, a huge outcry from gamers that could be heard for years to come. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater introduced a jungle environment, camouflage, survival mechanics, and a base management aspect that again pushed the boundaries of stealth gameplay. And Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriot, introduced hour-long cutscenes. Kojima has never been shy with his love for Hollywood, but even for him, the lines between movie and video game became a bit too blurred with this game. All of this leading us to March 27, 2013, when Kojima officially announced that the rumored Phantom Pain was indeed Metal Gear Solid 5. Let the controversy ensue. At this point, Metal Gear Solid is a blockbuster series, one of the biggest and longest running series in gaming. All the mainline games in the series have been met with critical acclaim, not a 1 scoring below 91 on Metacritic. Needless to say, that the hype for Metal Gear Solid 5 was palpable, and Kojima, with his years of experience, knew just how to capitalize on that, mostly through the incredibly cinematic and emotional trailers, leaving just enough hints and breadcrumbs for fans all over the world to obsess over for months, but also through the interviews and other promotional materials, and of course the controversies, because nothing sells better than controversy. It is well established that Hideo Kojima is inventive, creative, and many more such favorable names. But to Konami, who is also known to be chronically over budget and schedule. And this became a problem when Konami decided to pivot. They wanted out of the AAA games market and into the mobile market, and of all things, pachinko machines. Yeah, I know. To offset the cost and the many delays of Metal Gear Solid 5, Konami, in all of its wisdom, decided to release the first level of the game as a prologue, several years before the main game came out. Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. This wasn't communicated very well, however, and many people thought this was the full game. And when users and reviewers got their grubby hands on the prologue, it quickly came to light that this could be finished in as little as 2 hours, causing a lot of confusion and upheaval. To be fair, 2 hours for a prologue plus some extra content could be reasonable if Konami hadn't decided to also charge a full $40 for it. People were none too pleased. Then there was Kiefer Sutherland. Literally, the longtime and beloved voice actor David Hayter was suddenly and inexplicably replaced. At first, fans thought it was another Kojima trick, and Kiefer would voice a different character altogether. But as the game came close to release, this didn't seem to be the case. Hayter, who had at this point voiced both Solid Snake and Big Boss for almost 20 years now, was just as surprised as we were. In an interview with the Game Informer, he mentions that the only reason he found out about the game was because a producer explained that he would not be working on it. Several smaller controversies arise, but nothing like the bombshell that hits a few months before the game's release. In March 2015, 2015, without warning, all mention of Kojima and his production team was removed from Metal Gear promotion materials and the Metal Gear website. 2 months later, in May of 2015, the very popular playable teaser for Silent Hills was removed from the PlayStation Store, and shortly thereafter the game was cancelled. This was another project that Kojima had recently started working on. Things were clearly not going well between Kojima Productions and Konami. And indeed, a few months after Metal Gear Solid 5 was released, reports started coming in that Kojima and Kojima Productions was no longer part of Konami. Konami had started its pivot in earnest. What exactly happened is still mostly shrouded in mystery, but numerous outlets have reported on the difficult working conditions Konami created for Kojima and his team. There are more controversies, but I'll leave those for later. We really should get to discussing the game itself. Metal Gear Solid 5, at its core, tells a story about retribution and revenge. We find Big Boss as he wakes up from a 9-year coma, only to be targeted by an assassin from the mysterious group Cypher. And even though this game is now 8 years old, I'll try not to spoil the story, as there's some pretty good twists. Escaping the hospital serves as a tense intro to the game. You're almost completely powerless to the onslaught of assassins and Cypher soldiers. You hide, sneak and kill your way through the hospital, all guided by the bandaged up Ishmael. There are some very tense scenes here, and it's all scripted and planned, very reminiscent of earlier entries in the series. You of course manage to escape, and a helicopter takes you to Mother Base, where you learn what happened 9 years ago, during the events of Ground Zeroes.
So we won't have much time once we're there. Don't take too long getting used to your new self. Hang on.
Now, let me be honest. During my first playthrough back in 2015, I didn't make it through the game. And let me explain why. I played Ground Zeroes and loved it, although annoyed by its price and brevity. Then the release of Phantom Pain. Critics praised the game, 10 out of 10s left and right. I finally get to boot up the game for myself, and I absolutely loved it. It was exactly what I hoped it would be. Tense story, sneaking, Big Boss being a big badass. But then, the intro ended, and the open, unscripted sandbox levels of Afghanistan greeted me. Every game before this had tight scripted gameplay, and levels were often segmented areas you had to sneak through with limited solutions, which can provide some very tense gameplay, which Kojima has shown us many times. Now, in this game, we were left completely to our own devices. We get a mission objective that points us in the right direction, and how we get there and how we accomplish it is up to us. Stealth, guns, explosions, Carmageddon are all options in accomplishing a mission. And, it has to be said, it's a lot of fun. On the other hand though, this was paired with a scaled back story, cutscenes and narrative, other than recorded tapes with some background story. And a boring mission structure. You just select your next mission from the list and go. Especially after the bombastic opening, this was a punch in the gut. At least for me, and I gave up shortly into the game. Coming back to it after 8 years, and admittedly with much lower standards, I might have been wrong to give up so soon. Getting back to the story, we arrive at Mother Base, where they tell you it was completely destroyed 9 years ago after an attack by a special forces unit known as XOF, led by their sadistic commander Skullface. And this is also how you ended up in a coma. Now, 9 years later, you've sworn to rebuild Mother Base and take down XOF and its commander, who happened to be up to a bunch of no-goodery, including developing another bipedal mech with mass destructive capabilities. There's a lot of background story I'm skimming over here, but this game ties together the stories of Big Boss and Solid Snake pretty well. But let's talk gameplay, because that's where Metal Gear Solid 5 really shines. Even after 8 years, it's really nothing like it. So, your mission. Take down XOF and their commander and rebuild Mother Base. For how boring the mission structure is, the gameplay loop is really addictive. Once in the field, resource gathering is a big part of rebuilding Mother Base, which means anything from fuel, metals and diamonds, which come in handy little boxes and later big containers. So vehicles, animals and yes, even people. And this is where the real fun starts. With your Fulton recovery system, basically an inflatable balloon that pulls people up in the air to then be picked up by one of your planes. And don't ask me how that works, but it's so addictive. Knock out an enemy by choking, tranquilizing, dropping him, dropping something on him. You get the idea. Once knocked out, press Y to hook up the Fulton recovery system. And it's gone! And be careful though, because enemies around you might have something to say when they see one of their compatriots dangling from a balloon. But I love the idea of completely emptying out a camp of personnel, weapons and vehicles, only to have the next shift come in and be completely flabbergasted. By gathering resources, you can develop a whole host of items and weapons. Truly a staggering amount. These resources also go to expanding Mother Base itself. Think medical wing, intel, mercenaries, etc. And this is where the people that you borrow come in. And before you ask, yes, all the people that you bring in get magically converted to your side after a few days on base. Anyways, all personnel has stats. Some are good at medicine, others excel at weapons, so they get moved to their corresponding division, in turn leveling up that area of model base. Better stats level specific divisions faster. Personnel even have special skills that unlock different development items. It's like Pokemon with people, and it's really addictive. But this is just the top of the iceberg. There are so many mechanisms and systems in this game that work very well together. There's the buddy system, your first one being a horse, called the horse. I didn't come up with that. Basically just a vehicle to get you from point A to point B. But then there's Didi, or T-Dog. This adorable husky acts as a scout, spotting and tagging enemies, vehicles, medicine plants and more. With some upgrades and bonding, he's able to distract and kill enemies too. Very handy. There's a few others, notably the sniper Quiet, who due to her impractical clothing or lack thereof made quite a splash. Discourse around the sexual nature of her design flared up, and this was the start of another controversy. To which Kojima famously responded, quote, "Once you recognize the secret reason for her exposure, you will feel ashamed of your words and deeds." The secret reason being that she breathes through her skin and can't wear concealing clothing because she'll suffocate. This is absolutely hilarious to me and sounds more of a situation like design first and rationale later. There are many other systems in the game, but to highlight a few. There is the binocular system for tagging enemies and receiving intel, your prosthetic arm with many different functions, like sonar to make hidden enemies visible, interrogating soldiers for information about your mission, weather changes like dust storms and rain, and of course there's the cardboard box, which you won't be able to develop if your tech level isn't sufficiently high. Gameplay wise, this game still shines. There's only a few things where I noticed the game's age. Most noticeably, climbing. I'm used to games like Breath of the Wild now where you can climb on any surface, and this game is not that. Especially in an open world where you often have to make a quick getaway. I got in some tight spots because I couldn't climb or kept slipping down something weird, but that's really just a minor gripe. All of this goes to say that the gameplay is still incredibly tight, even all these years later. The graphics too look very decent. And yes, there are some ugly textures every once in a while, but lighting, weather, character models, and just in general world building look very good. It looks like a game from the previous generation, but it hasn't aged badly. And because of the age of the game, you can play everything maxed out and still get a very decent frame rate on the Steam Deck. Not quite 60, but if you cap it at 45, it'll be very stable. Sound design is good too, with tense music when enemies discover you, and good environmental sounds. Another thing of note is that the backstory tapes, of which there are many, can be listened to while you do missions. I love this addition. I would often listen to some tapes while I was on my way to a mission, or during some other menial task I happened to be doing. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on some world building. People have criticized this game for its empty world and boring level design, but I disagree with this. First of all, it's not the type of game where you go chasing events on a map like Saints Row or Assassin's Creed or something like that. The feel of the game is way more focused than that. All the missions seem urgent and needed, but there's plenty of side activities to do if you really want to. Second, we're in the deserts of Afghanistan and the jungles of Africa. I wouldn't expect to find something every time I step off the road. I think the world building fits the game's atmosphere perfectly. So, to answer the question, is this still a good game in 2024? Getting back to my main criticism, I have to admit, I might have been hasty the first time around. Yes, the intro to the main game is still a slap in the face, even the second time around when I was expecting it. But when you push past that and get a little further into the game, there's actually a decent story to be had. On the other hand, the tone of the game is completely different. I miss the more chatty big boss with his funny one-liners. In this game, he doesn't say much of anything, to the point where it's almost awkward sometimes. Which is ironic, since they hired such a big name actor to do it. Interestingly, the game does give a bit of an explanation for this in the form of a late game plot twist. Another thing I wasn't a big fan of is that the story seems incomplete. It feels like a whole third act was being set up near the end of the game, but was completely cut, which is very possible because of the fallout between Kojima and Konami. All in all, I would say this is still a very good game. Maybe it's not the best Metal Gear game, but considering its tumultuous development past, it's amazing how well it came out in the end. Let me know what you guys think, and leave some comments and likes if you guys liked the video. Take a look at this video if you're hankering for some more open world games, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.